Welcome to today's last big balance tuning before the release of Prepatch. Now, this shouldn't really matter because this balance tuning is for midnight, it's for the beta of midnight, so it won't really go live once the Prepatch launches, but it is still something important because many specs are being changed, they are being adjusted, and also it's good to list all of these changes now to make some clarity. Because if you simply go and tune in to the patch notes and start reading through all of these things, well, a lot of these, quite a lot of these actually, are either bug fixes or hot fixes that had been pushed weeks ago already in the beta, that Blizzard is now only officially writing as a patch note, even though these things were already there, so you might tune in and read that your spec has been nerfed by 15%, even though that has been going on for weeks already, or things that had already been announced and patched in the PTR version 12.0 instead of 12.0.1, which is the beta version, but it was already known, it was already a known thing, and instead now it is being officialized into the beta. So we are now cleaning up a lot of these irrelevant points and only listing the things that are new for today, or they have been adjusted or changed in this latest round of tuning. We're starting with the first one, which is the most convoluted one right off the bat, which is the change to Death Knight, specifically Unholy Death Knight. The announcement itself starts pretty funnily because it starts saying that the previous weeks ago hotfix of nerfing all of your damage by 25% is being reverted. So you have about half a second of happiness before you read 3 lines down. Each ability coefficient has been reduced by 25%. So the result is the same, the 25% nerf is still there for Unholy. However, what also comes on top of the already existing 25% nerf you had as a spec is another 15% nerf. Across all of these changes, from nerfing your melee damage, your score strike damage, the damage of Putrefy, the damage of your Apex talents, the damage of your ghouls especially being nerfed, this nets out to be another 15-ish% or so nerf on top of what you already received. So, the voices in the corridors and the possible speculations right now are putting Unholy now even below Frost DK in terms of damage, for example, in Mythic Plus at the moment. A couple of good changes, at least nice to see they are there, they are being identified. Both Blood DK and Guardian Druid are getting their damage flat buffed, 15% more damage buff to Blood and 20% more damage buff to Guardian. This is good because the tanks were doing little damage, so it's nice to identify the two of the weakest DPS tanks and getting them to do more damage. Past Death Knight, we have to move over to Demon Hunter, although Demon Hunter doesn't actually get much. You have something we have mentioned being terrible, being addressed by Blizzard, however the address is short and dry and won't do much to fix this issue, which is the Reap damage of Devourer, which is buffed by 15%. Reap, not Eradicate, but only the Reap version of the ability should be buffed by like 200% to make this spell good. 15% is definitely not enough to make you even worth clicking the button. At the moment, both of the hero talents, both Voice Card and Annihilator, are basically barely even wanting to press Reap because of how weak it is. And this change is definitely not it. There is a curious change for a Druid. No, it's not Balanced Druid. No, it's also not Feral. Those are still ignored for today. Resto Druid, it's an interesting point because it is in line to be the S tier healer for Mythic Plus and a reasonably good healer also for the raid. You have a communist change. You have a redistribution of wealth around the population of buttons in your spec. In this case, the wealth is taken away from Regrowth because it's nerfed by 10%, and even Intensity, the very soon-to-come powerful talent for Regrowth, is also nerfed. But what you get in return is getting both Wild Growth and Rejuvenation buffed by 10%. So you lose some 12 to 13% healing power from your Regrowth, and you get them back in Reju and in Wild Growth. This is because of how powerful over time, over the past couple of expansion, Regrowth had become compared to the rest of your toolkit as a Resto Druid. Now, the biggest, by far biggest change up to now, and possibly even the biggest changes of the entire set of tuning, is to Devastation Evoker. Because Devastation Evoker initially already gets some very positive changes. So The first change is somewhat neutral. You have Consume Flame now deals less damage from consuming Fire Breath, but also now consumes less duration of Fire Breath, with also the positive of buffing your Disintegrate damage by 20%. However, that's not the biggest one of the changes. The biggest one is the hotfix. The hotfix of the month-long Broken Catalyze. While channeling Disintegrate, your Fire Breath on the target deals damage 100% more often. Now you're wondering, how is this that powerful when Fire Breath itself doesn't do huge damage for Devastation? Even if it ticks twice as fast, would it be that big of a boost? The boost obviously is in Consume Flame, because if you press Disintegrate with Catalyze active, you make Fire Breath tick twice as fast, which means that when Consume Flame activates and it has to consume the now nerfed 1.5 seconds of Fire Breath, because it's ticking twice as fast, thanks to Catalyze, it's gonna be exploding twice as many ticks of Fire Breath for twice as much damage. That is also why Blizzard went on to preemptively nerf the amount of time you burn of Fire Breath, because now Catalyze being fixed, because before it wasn't working, only the first tick of your Disintegrate was working and then it was breaking down. This fix is alone by itself some 15+% damage increase in single target for Flame Shaper, which is very, very good. On top of this, you have an even better one of the changes for your AoE damage, because Feed the Flames has been buffed by 7 times more damage, like 7.2 times more damage than before, because your now passive auto-cast Firestorm, instead of doing 198% spell power damage, is going to be doing 240% times 6 damage. That's how big the damage increase is for Devastation Evoker, both for the AoE part, thanks to Feed the Flames, and now the single target part for Flame Shaper, now that Catalyze has been fixed. Talking about being very powerful, we cannot talk about it when it comes to Hunter, because marksmanship was weak. So Blizzard targets Dark Ranger and showers it in buffs. Black Arrow direct damage and periodic damage and black powder damage are all being buffed for the hero talent, for marksmanship only, not for BM. That's because BM instead is actually getting nerfed. Blizzard is trying to make you go back to play with more Dire Beasts by buffing the Dire Beast damage, but the Stomp base AoE damage of your pets, as well as the Wild Rush damage in AoE past 2 targets, has also been nerfed for Beast Mastery. Talking about nerfs, if there was a spec doing even better than the ranged versions of Hunter, was the melee one, Survival, which gets nerfed. Their strongest and basically only played hero talent, Sentinel, is being nerfed. Your Sentinel's Mark is now going to buff your next Wildfire Bomb by less, and the Tip of the Spear damage bonus has also been nerfed for Survival as Sentinel, which might as well mean all of Survival, since Sentinel was the only hero talent you were playing as a spec. Then you have Mage, possibly overall the best performing class in the beta so far, simply looking at each individual spec and how they were doing, because of Frost and Arcane doing so well together, and they are both nerfed, basically. Arcane gets, some redistribution of damage. Arcane Cleave, so the AoE portion of your Arcane Barrage, gets buffed, so you do more damage on 5 targets with your Arcane Barrage, but the rest of your toolkit is nerfed. Arcane Barrage, the ability itself, is nerfed by a flat 10%, Arcane Missiles also 10%, Arcane Blast also 10%, and Arcane Orb by 20%. Your AoE damage should stay somewhat the same, actually slightly nerfed because of the Arcane Cleave buff, but the rest of your single target results and lower target damage has been nerfed. As Arcane, same goes for Frost. Blizzard didn't like Frostbolt and Flurry having so much power in the spec over what the Blizzard thinks the new core of the spec should be, which is Ice Lances and breaking Shatter stacks. So they buff Ice Lance, they buff Shatter damage, but they nerf Flurry and Frostbolt by 10 and 15%. What is more relevant though for Frost itself, because of the hero talent of choice, is Frostfire. Because Flash Freeze Burn, which was the AoE portion, the splash damage given to Glacial Spike has been nerfed from 50% of the damage splashing down to 25%, as well as the Frostfire Bolt buff damage itself going from 80 to 60% for the hero talent. This was in an attempt, yet again, to try to make Spellslinger playable for both Arcane and Frost. The hero talent is getting buffs across the board for both of these specs. So there is now a danger, a possible, tangible danger that one of these two specs might go back playing Spellslinger, having half of their damage profile come from the hero talent Splinters after yet another round of nerfs to the other hero talents and buffing Spellslinger again. Now this one might be a personal vendetta. There might be something we are missing, you know, that is going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, which is the hatred that Blizzard has for Herald of the Sun as a whole, but particularly Herald of the Sun for Red Paladin. Because Herald of the Sun had been garbage for a long time, especially for Red Paladin. It had not been played for a long time. Recently, in the beta, Red Paladins were playing Herald of the Sun. It wasn't a complete wash over Templar, but it was a popular hero talent. Blizzard said no. Dawnlight and Sun's Avatar are both nerfed by 25%, and Solar Grace now gives you less than half than the haste that you were gaining before. And in return, Templar has gotten Hammer of Light buffed by 15% on the primary target and 25% on the secondary target. We will see how the final tuning will be looking like, but if I had to guess, I think once again Templar will take over by the release of Midnight. What will not take over, at least for this patch, is the damage of Prot Paladin, which has been nerfed. We have mentioned Blizzard identified the lowest damage dealers in the beta for tanks, being Guardian and Blood DK, and they were buffed. They are doing the same for the strongest of the damage dealers for tanks, Prot, which is being nerfed. Because Hammer and Anvil now has a scaling reduction, damage past 5 targets, and the flat damage itself of Hammer of Wrath is nerfed by 30%. This is a problem, obviously, because of this damage profile. Hammer of Wrath is only active during wings. You can see the average cast of Hammer of Wrath being 65k. It's pretty good damage. It's pretty good damage by itself as a single button with a very low cooldown, and then Hammer and Anvil, of course, is basically your biggest source of damage by a long shot, and you're getting nerfed. That's what it is for Prot Paladin. Priest get very few changes. Holy Priest did get a whole bunch of older hot fixes and PTR of Midnight changes officialized into the beta, but we already knew about all of them. They get a flat 10% healing down increase, which isn't really fixing the issue of the spec, which is awful to play with right now. Shadow Priest gets, besides Void Torrent damage being reduced by 20%, this is one of those arbitrary changes. We don't really see why would Void Torrent be worth getting nerfed by 20% for this, but it's more fun to laugh once again about the tuning of Psychic Link. I believe this is the 24th change to the ability in 3 expansions. We are on a good track as usual to get Psychic Link retouched to tune the AoE values of Shadow Priest. 45% is on the high end, you know. Probably we are bound to see this go all the way down again to like 30% by the time maybe not even Season 1 is over for Shadow, depending on how powerful they will be. Talking about powerful, Demonology, Warlock, and the Soul Harvester power right now is very strong, even excluding the bugs currently benefiting the spec. All of these changes for Soul Harvester as demo are very strong. Obviously, demo was previously playing all the time with Diabolist, as it is tradition, of course, for Blizzard to go and try to buff the currently underplayed hero talent specs, so Soul Harvester wasn't the choice for demo. It gets buffed significantly, and right now it's the strongest one. We will see if this will remain like this, and with the bug fixes, how will this change? Danger, 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 because Destro has a problem. Destro right now has been chilling in the beta. They aren't particularly OP, but they have been actually on the top half, even top third of the best results in the beta in terms of Mythic Plus. But this was all done with Diabolist, just like demo. Diabolist is very strong, even for Destro, so Blizzard obviously goes and does the obvious. They buff the other hero talent, so they go and buff Hellcaller. This is danger, of course, because traditionally most of Destro locks hate Hellcaller, because Hellcaller is trying to put you into a dot spec. It's trying to make you do damage with Malevolence, with Blackened Soul and Wither damage, when you just want to shoot out Chaos Bolts and do a more billion damage. You don't want 40% of your damage come from some passive dots. However, that's what you're getting now with the buff to Hellcaller, if it will eventually start overperforming what is currently the best option for destroying the beta, which is Diabolist. Now the last ones are Warriors. They do get a lot of words in their changes, not many are too relevant. They don't do much other than small percentage increases, like for arms, some more cleave damage, some more dreadnought damage. For Fury you have, amazingly, a 25% auto-attack damage nerf and the rampage damage reduced. The best one of the changes for the specs themselves is the Apex Talent buff for Fury, getting you 3% strength per stack of your Apex Talent instead of 1%, but the overall best change is for Slayer. Because while Colossus, cool, okay, fine, Colossus does get a 20% damage increase to demolish, but the better one is that now Imminent Demise has an additional effect for Slayer. Sudden Death has a 100% chance to trigger Reap the Storm. While also for Fury, Reap the Storm now gets an increase in proc chance of Reap the Storm by itself. Arms gets it reduced from 25 to 15, but Arms was able to benefit to try to proc Reap the Storm from two different abilities, Mortar Strike and Cleave, whereas Fury only had Bloodthirst to try to proc Reap the Storm with. The reason why this is very good is because in live, this is your warrior. In live, that's how powerful Reap the Storm is. The reason why it's this powerful is not because something changed in the hero talent of Reap the Storm, it's because of the tier set. Overpower in live has a 2% chance per stack of Overwhelmed as a Slayer to trigger Reap the Storm at 150% effectiveness, so even more powerful than a normal one. Now, obviously, once you went into the beta without this tier set, your Reap the Storm damage just cratered off a cliff, because you were forced to try to click Bloodthirst every few seconds and have like a 25% chance to proc it only and nothing else, which was very, very poor. So it is a good change to add this to your Execute as a proc chance thanks to Sudden Death. It's not nearly still as powerful as your tier set from live, but it has gone back to make Reap the Storm a much stronger effect now with this change. So overall, for both Arms and Fury, these were positive changes, finally finishing with Protection Warrior, which is getting a similar but not fully equal treatment to Guardian and Blood DK and their damage increase. Prot also gets damage increase to Revenge and your Apex Talent. Your Phalanx won't amount to an actual 20% damage buff like Blood DK and Guardian, but to be fair, Prot's damage was already higher than both Guardian and Blood DK, so they didn't need nearly as much of a damage boost as those two other tanks. So this is the entire list of the changes after we have skimmed through a whole bunch of hotfixes and midnight PTR changes that we already know about. We even had entire videos about, like the latest balance tuning changes like the focus increase, changes to survival, for example. So these were the ones we had left for the latest round of tuning for the beta. We are a few days away from the pre-patch, and then hopefully between the pre-patch and the release we will get more time for some more balance tuning, especially maybe, okay, we might be in full copium zone right now, but something more than just small tiny percentage changes, but maybe something more substantial to fix some of the specs, some of the problems of some of these specs, which can't just be fixed by, you know, giving 10% more healing to Holy Priest, for example. You would have to expect something larger. But for today, on this Thursday, this is what we have in terms of tuning for the beta of Midnight. So, with this done and said with, we can now leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yep, I had to order a beam of steel to support my curtains. Apparently 260 millimeters is not the same as 2600 millimeters.